Welcome to Community Economics 101. I'm Scott Loveridge of Michigan State University, and it's my pleasure to give you a brief and exciting tour of some of the basic concepts of community economics and with special application for rural development employees of USDA taking this course. So, I don't know anything about you. I do know that you live in or work for rural America, but I don't know your age, your background, or what you mean by rural. I don't know if you're a native to your community or a transplant. So I'm going to do my best to provide some information that might be useful to you irrespective of your background. Some things that are out there that we do know is that rural America is a varied place. There are lots of different people who live there. They might have come just this year. They might be a new immigrant, have come in as a refugee or some other way, or just wanting to get away from urban America. Or they might have come 10,000 or more years ago as Native Americans who migrated across that land bridge from Siberia and became the first people to occupy the wonderful continent that we find ourselves in. They might be in a rural area that's part of a major metropolitan area. You know, there are definitely places with highly rural character who, that are located really in a place that's considered a major city. On the other hand, it might be a place that's 100 miles to the nearest gas station and really, people living a very subsistence existence out there, having to go a long way away to buy anything and bring anything into the local economy. So there's variety there, and that's wonderful. It's an awesome place. There's all kinds of things going on, and so it's a challenge for USDA rural development people to figure out how to fit into all of this variety with the programs that they have available, which are very valuable to advancing rural America. There are certainly some things about agriculture that vary across the United States. Agriculture might be a very important component of the rural economy. On the other hand, we have other types of communities like mining or forestry or very dry places where it's not particularly agricultural, but still very rural. And so, how do we fit our programs into that setting? And it can be done. It's just, it's a different set of activities that have to take place there. Another thing that is very different from one place to the next is that rural population counts might be changing. They might be in long-term decline, as much of rural America is dealing with now. But on the other hand, as cities are growing, and they kind of reach out and they gobble up rural areas and do a suburban expansion. We've seen a little less of that in recent times, but it's still going on. So the situations can vary quite a bit from one place to the next, and it's the job of the USDA rural development professional to help identify some strategies that work for those communities that can fit into the programs that you have available. There are definitely constants about rural America, and I think anybody who lives in rural America does it because they like the rural character of the place, and that's the charm of any rural area, is that it's just the open space, the ability to be an individual that's out there. I think people everywhere want low crime, and they want high income, and they want good services. And so I think USDA Rural Development is extremely well positioned to help communities achieve those goals. So one of the really popular concepts that a lot of people use to help conceptualize the rural economy, or any economy that matter, of a small area, is the leaky bucket analogy. And it's a very popular thing. You'll hear people talk about this in all kinds of different publications. This particular image came from one out of 2011, but the concept has been around for years and years and years. And basically the idea is that There's a flow that goes on in the local economy. Money comes in by selling goods outside of the local area, so that's an export, so money coming in. And then money leaves because people import into the local area. They're buying from outside of the local area. And so if you want to sort of increase the amount of economic activity in an area, you either want to sell more or buy less. And that can help stem can increase the level of economic activity, the amount of water in the bucket. And so you can think about that through savings and investment, reducing the outflows that way, through reducing consumer purchases, business supply purchases, or the sending of profits outside of the community. Or you can just sell more, increase the income from sale of labor, goods, and services into the community. And it's sort of a tried and true way of conceptualizing the local economy. It does have, kind of some shortcomings that I'll talk about in a minute. But so how do we operationalize? Well, there are sell more strategies. So business attraction. And literally over the years, millions and millions of dollars have been spent to try to attract businesses to communities. There are tax breaks that happen. There's hiring economic development professionals to go around and try to visit businesses that might want to locate in the community, and then hosting people that are looking at the community as a location. It's big business. Lots of people doing it. Sometimes people are successful, sometimes not. Sometimes what I find is that communities may be overly ambitious in that regard and may be looking to attract a type of business that doesn't really fit that community. It has to make dollars and cents, bottom line, be attractive to that business to be able to convince them to move to that area. And so, if the profitability of the location just doesn't work, you don't have the workforce, you don't have the management talent, you don't have the raw materials that business needs, they're not going to choose a place because it's cheap, because the housing is cheap. They've got to have all these other things, the transportation networks, the access to their customers that need to be in place. So it's a strategy that has its attractiveness, but it also can divert resources from other strategies that may be more appropriate for the community. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that it has to be realistic in terms of how you would implement that and what you expect out of it. Business retention and expansion is also a very popular strategy where here you work intensively with the businesses in your own area to make sure that they're as profitable as can be. It often involves going and visiting with those businesses to kind of understand their needs and then putting together a plan to help the business achieve its goals. And it might be, workforce training. It might be, helping them improve their infrastructure. It might be a loan to that business. It might be a marketing plan. There are all kinds of things that one can do to help a business that's already committed to your area. Another set of activities might be to invest in transportation and such that you're able to export more or get more people, more customers into your area. And that's obviously something that happens a lot. Worker productivity is another way of dealing with that. Obviously, the more effective a workforce can be, the more efficient that product process becomes, and the more likely it is that that business can compete on the international market, at which many of our communities are now competing not just with the community next door, but internationally for business. And so, we've got to have a workforce that's ready and able to do the job in the most effective manner possible. And there's all kinds of, worker training programs, certification programs, helping to keep them healthy Those kinds of things can be very effective to make the community more competitive on the international marketplace. And then finally, another big one is tourism development. Much of rural America has wonderful outdoor amenities, cultural amenities that other people might want to come and visit and enjoy. And so that could be a way to generate additional business into the community or encourage people to stick around more and not necessarily go elsewhere for their vacation. Although we all like to go see other areas. So I don't think anybody would say to people to never go anywhere. On the buy less side, there are also some very good strategies. Sort of the value-added activities where you're looking to bring a supplier in so that you're more of the value chain takes place in the community. There's thinking about diversification. If the community is only producing 2 or 3 things that it sells to the outside, maybe adding new activities that can take place in that community could help reduce the amount of things that are brought in and bought. And part of that might be new enterprise development, business startups, encouraging people to think about business as a career, mentoring new business owners so that they succeed. We know, study after study has shown that the majority of new businesses fail, and to the extent that they have good mentors and systems to help them restart after a failure, the success rate can be improved. And then finally, there's sort of the buy local strategy, where you just simply encourage people through social promotion to look at their local businesses and consider buying there before they buy somewhere else. So, buy at the local hardware store instead of the big box retailer 50 miles away, those kinds of things. So those are all things that fit into that buy less mindset. So all viable strategies to consider, and that brings me to my next point, multipliers. As we consider the various strategies that are available to a community that wants to develop its economy, not only do you have to judge whether the strategy is going to be successful in terms of the outcome that you're looking for, you also have to think about the impact on the total community. And it's an accepted fact that anytime you have a change in the community, an economic change, that there's going to be a ripple effect that takes place based on that initial change. And so if a new business comes to town and hires people, those people are going to get income off of that. And the business is also maybe going to buy things locally that it needs for its operation. So there's sort of 2 sorts of income that take place directly: income to the workers and the income to the suppliers, the local suppliers. And then those local suppliers then go off and they may need to buy supplies from other local businesses, and so those businesses gain, and so those are called sort of indirect effects. And then everybody that gets new income into the household from the new business or the suppliers of the new business, they go out and spend money too, and that's called an induced effect. So we have a direct effect, an indirect effect, and an induced effect that takes place from that initial shock to the economy. And of course that works equally the same way in reverse. If we lose a business, the same process happens where people have less income, they're buying less supplies, and so those negative effects also multiply through the economy. And so it's an accepted fact within economics that we have these multiplier effects. But the problem comes in that some people have gone definitely too far with that concept. And at some point somebody kind of started a rumor that the number was 7, that for that $1 change that happens in the economy, that somebody thought that it would be 7 times. The $1 would become $7 as it multiplies through the economy, and that's just simply wrong. There's no study that has ever shown anything like that. A more common number would be 1.5. So if you get a shock of $1, positive or negative in the economy, then it's going to translate into $1.50 by the time all the multiplier effects kick in. So it's much lower than most people might imagine. And that's sort of a typical effect, but it does vary. It depends on the sector that you're talking about and how much that new business or that new activity is sourcing its supplies locally, how much it pays, those kinds of things, work their way in. So the multiplier may vary a little bit, but I've never seen a study showing 7. The most common way to estimate a multiplier is through what we call an input-output model. And this is, it's a way of looking at all the flows in the local economy and then figuring out what that dollar change is going to do depending on where the dollar change comes into the local economy. And many folks are using a piece of software called ImPlan to do that, and you can access that from often from a university or a planning organization like a COG, or consulting firms would have those. And often it can be very useful, as the community is trying to look at these trade-offs to think about, well, what would the impact of this be? What would the impact of that be? So that they can get a little more realistic about what they might expect if the strategy is successful, so that people don't sort of get overly optimistic about how much change is going to happen in the community based on this strategy that is going to take place. The development of a community is a very long-term process. There's no easy, quick fixes associated with it. It's building over time. It's development. It's a process. So it needs to build over time, and it's not an instant just add water kind of thing. It's working together, dialogue, and consistent effort that makes the difference in communities. So we talked a little bit about the leaky bucket model. There are some other models out there that could be looked at as well. They're very, very useful to consider as well. And one of those is asset-based development. And this was popularized by Kretzmann at McKnight in the early 90s. Started looking at this. And the idea is that often you get these communities that they feel like there's very little that they can do. They feel disempowered, and this is a whole process for really inventorying what the community has instead of what it doesn't have, and looking at what are our assets and how can we sort of change how we apply them. So somebody might have carpentry skills and another person might have a bunch of lumber that's sitting around, and so can we put those two things together and create a new facility for whatever. So those are the kinds of things that one can look at, and so it's sort of an approach, and the book is a very detailed approach, and I'm not sure anybody does it that detailed as the book offers very often, but really looking at what do you have and what can we build off of to achieve our goals, instead of kind of asking for resources to come from somewhere else. And so it's a good way to look at things as well. And that, I think, might have informed what Cornelia Flora at Iowa State University came up with, thinking about the community in a much more holistic fashion. And I think that's a very helpful way to think about the local economy as well. And of course, financial capital and the inflows, the dollars in, the dollars out, the grants and loans that might be available from USDA Rural Development or other agencies are an important part of the whole mix. And really, a community cannot function without them. But it needs to be taken into consideration with all of the other dimensions of a community that are also important to make it a nice place to live. So there's the built capital, the buildings that are there, the highways, the bridges, all that, the communications infrastructure that we really can't live without. And if that's not in good shape, then you're going to see, difficulties in the future. Natural capital. This is something that rural America does really well. But we need to be good stewards of that as well. And so making sure that the place continues to offer those natural amenities, the air, the landscapes, the water, the wildlife, the plant life, that make it a special place. The cultural capital is also very important. This is really what differentiates one community from another. What are our traditions? What languages do we have here? What's our history? Where did we come from? How do we celebrate that? Those are all really important dimensions to develop as we strive to make our places special. Then there's human capital, which traditionally we've thought of as the degrees, how many people with a high school diploma, how many people with a college diploma, and those are good concepts, and certainly we need to measure those and our progress on those. But I think it's also important to consider all of the skills, whether they're degreed or formally recognized or not. I think a farmer that knows their land and how to work that land and how to sustain that land has human capital as much as somebody with a PhD. And so, we need to make sure that we recognize those other forms of human capital that are present in the local economy and to develop them. Then there's social capital. And this is, how people in the community support each other in times of need and how they develop each other. So can I call on you to do things? Can you call on me to do things? And what do those relationships look like? And are they positive? And those are really important as well. And then finally, there's political capital. How do we interact with larger entities out there, whether it be state government or county government or national government, to obtain the things that we're going after as a community. And so, as a rural development professional, it's important to think about this whole array of things and the role of the agency in terms of, obviously making its programs available and making people understand its programs, but thinking about how it fits into the total picture and helping the community do that as well. And so I hope that this little tour of community economics is beneficial to you and that you enjoy the rest of the course.